Warning, this is a fun and random effect but does contain flashing images. Over the last couple of months, I've been learning Blender and After Effects in order to finish this, my first proper project. And although I say proper, it's actually a Razer Gamer catheter product design. Anyway, I was going to share with you some of the things I'd learned whilst making this, like this grainy thermal imaging effect made in Blender. But I couldn't, because I didn't fully understand what I'd done myself. So I want to fix that in this series by extracting what, if anything, I've learned. By rewinding the process and reverse engineering effects like this one. So, I sat down and put together this mood board. I want to reuse these thermal imaging colours, but how would I efficiently recreate this grainy, noisy texture in Blender? Well, without further ado, this is how I made this grainy thermal imaging effect in Blender. Let's go. I began by positioning my camera to face down in the centre of the scene like this. I then duplicated it, and I'll explain why later, but first I turned off the world lighting like this and added a green sun with the strength set to 2. Next, I added my design as an SVG file to scale it up and give it some extrusion under the geometry properties like this. Now, I wanted to remove the default matte material before duplicating this layer another 2 times like this. Bear in mind that the exact numbers I'm working with may depend on the scale you work on, so you can always pause to see what numbers I'm working with. Now for the middle layer, I wanted to use a green emission set to around 50. I then added a glass shader and a Musgrave texture, scaled up to around 50 and the lacunarity lowered to about 0.3. I used the Musgrave to control the glass roughness and mixed the glass and the emission with a mix shader like this. I used the Musgrave to control the factor and that ends up looking something like this. Now, for the top layer, I duplicated our last material so I could reuse the glass. I keyframed the index of refraction and Musgrave scale to scale down over time, and that gives this effect. Now, for the final voxel glitch material, I only wanted it to affect the eyes, so I added an emission controlled by a Voronoi texture. I scaled up the Voronoi to around 1000 and keyframed it by about 10% over time, and you'll see what that looks like in a second, but first, I set the randomness to 0 and plugged the Voronoi colour into this green and black colour ramp. I used this to control the emission strength and colour, and that ends up looking something like this. But to further exaggerate this voxel glitch effect, I added a remesh modifier set to blocks and the depth to 5. I also keyframed it over time from 0.9 to 0.4 at the end, which really exaggerates the glitch effect. But be careful, always save before experimenting with these remesh modifiers. Anyway, with all our materials completed, I wanted to add some depth to the layers, so I keyframed the location of the top and bottom layer, and coming back to the beginning, spaced them out like this, which gives some gravitational pull to the layers. For my primary camera, I added a subtle dolly in and turned on the depth of field and targeted the top glass layer like this. For my secondary camera, I exaggerated this dolly in by moving all the way in like this and adding this intensive depth of field, setting the f-stop to 0.1, which gives this lovely bokeh or bokeh effect. Anyway, I managed to get away with rendering these using only 2 transmission bounces and 16 samples. But what about the thermal effect? Well, this is the key. To come under the view transform properties and switch from filmic to false colour. And for the grainy noise texture, I simply turned off denoise option. So this is how I got this grainy thermal imaging effect made in Blender. But you could smoothen things out using a vector blur in After Effects. Or you could use some creative editing alongside our dual camera setup to get something flashy. Because I would love to hear how you would use or improve this effect. You can tag me across socials at Okay Ben, to share with me anything you come up with, because I would love to spotlight anything I really like in the next episode. And by the way, I thought this vector blur worked so well, I used it in this week's poster design, available for free on my Patreon. Remember to join to suggest what you'd like to see next time. Perhaps something like this Y2K matrix made in After Effects.